Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
And welcome. Glad you're with us on the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim is here. I'm here. And we have good, bad, and crazy martinis for you. And Jim, you were at the Jets-Redskins game here locally. The Redskins did not look particularly good. Your Jets at one point were up 31 in that game. So congratulations. You got bragging rights over all D.C. for at least, 3-4 years now? 4 years.
I was going to say, as listeners to this podcast know, by and large, a lot of this season for Jets fans has been an absolute poop sandwich. But having been said, if I get to give grief to fans of the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Giants, and the Washington Redskins, the season's not a total loss. I can live very happily with that. First game that I took my sons to, we all had a great time. Sorry if you're a Redskins fan, but I really appreciated those tickets that I was able to get dirt cheap because Redskins fans have given up on the season. Great weekend had by all.
Wow. So, last time we talked about a Jets win, which was about a week ago, I said, well, you need to find more federal holidays. All you really need to do is get moved to the NFC East, and then You're pretty much golden, right?
We're in the wrong conference. That's the only way I can explain it. So.
All right. Well, let's get on to the martinis now. As we said, good, bad, and crazy. And, Jim, you mentioned saving a lot of money on tickets. That's still a drop in the bucket compared to the kind of money that Federal Express, I guess officially known as FedEx, spends pretty much in any given second. But FedEx is now in this huge fight with the New York Times because the New York Times decided to make FedEx the poster child of the corporation that just totally rips off the taxpayer by not paying federal taxes, all thanks to Donald Trump making his rich cronies even richer. Here's a little bit of what the Times said. In the 2017 fiscal year, FedEx owed more than $1.5 billion in taxes. The next year, it owed nothing. What changed was the Trump administration's tax cut, for which the company had lobbied hard. The public face of its lobbying effort, Fred Smith, the CEO and founder, who repeatedly took to the airwaves to champion the power of tax cuts. If you make the United States a better place to invest, there's no question in my mind that we would see a renaissance of capital investment. Now, the New York Times claims that there wasn't that much reinvestment. Essentially, they gave the money back to the shareholders, and FedEx went from an effective tax rate of 34% in fiscal year 2017 to less than zero in 2018. So FedEx did not take this lying down. Fred Smith, chairman of FedEx, actually challenging A.G. Sulzberger of the New York Times to a debate about tax policy. But then he went and pointed out that the New York Times also paid zero federal income tax in 2017 on earnings of $111 million and only $30 million in 2018, just 18% of their pre-tax book income. And here's the best part. Also in 2018, the New York Times cut their capital investments nearly in half to $57 million, which equates to a rounding error when compared to the $6 billion of capital that FedEx invested in the U.S. economy during that same year. So, Jim, the billionaires are fighting back.
Well, yeah, but there are two things that I really like about this. The first is I'm struck by the number of businesses. Let's face it, we are not only in a populist moment. The concept of any pro-business Democrats has pretty much evaporated. You saw the reaction to Howard Schultz when he flirted with the idea of running for president. Here's a guy who'd been a Democrat in good standing, but had the audacity to say that, actually businesses are job creators. And getting that first job can make all the difference in the world for a teenager who's had some challenges in life. And they hated him. They tore him apart. All of a sudden, Stephen Colbert is telling jokes about how dirty the bathrooms are at Starbucks. And, this free market system, which, by the way, being free market is not necessarily the same thing as being pro-business. But by and large, it's worked out pretty darn well for these corporations. It would be nice to see them stand up for the system that has enabled them to thrive so much. And so that when somebody comes along with a, one, inaccurate accusation of, oh, these companies don't pay taxes, to one, stand up and correct them, but two, defend their actions and point out the investments that they're making there. I want to see more of this. And obviously people think, generally think well of FedEx. They always like to see those packages come to the door. Sometimes you get Amazon stuff from them. You're like, oh, this is good. People generally, people might hate big oil or big, billionaire. Actually, remember Bernie Sanders used to say millionaires and billionaires in the big banks?
Sure.
Greg, do you notice he only says billionaires in the big banks now?
That's right.
Now that he's a millionaire, all of a sudden millionaires are cool now. That's fine. There's nothing wrong. But one other point I noticed in that New York Times article talking about most of the money went to shareholders. Has the New York Times ever heard of CalPERS, which is the teachers union or public employees union out in California? My metaphorical brother-in-law, a professor at Boston University named David Weber, wrote a book called The Rise of the Working Class Shareholder, Labor's Last Best Weapon. And a whole bunch of unions have bought shares of stock in the companies that they represent, thus getting them a seat at the table during shareholder meetings. They get a vote on who's on executive compensation. They get a vote on all kinds of other decisions about management of the company. And this is all perfectly legal. And for me, who's a free market guy, this is organized labor using it. It's not strikes. It's not violence. It's not, angry protests. This is hey, you know what? We've got resources in our pension fund. Let's use it to become shareholders in our own companies so we get a little more say of how it's done. And oh, by the way, this means we have even more stake in seeing this company thrive. All of a sudden, unions want those dividend payments to be higher. So this is a good thing. So when they say, the shareholders are benefiting, well, who do you think the shareholders are? Are there millionaires and billionaires in the class? Yes, there are plenty of them. But there also are groups who are the great working class that the New York Times thinks that it's standing up for. So a double benefit here. I'm really glad to see this from Smith at FedEx. I hope other CEOs stand up for this. And I genuinely believe part of the reason you're seeing this populist moment, part of the reason you're seeing this open, full-throated advocacy for socialism, people arguing that the American system has totally failed. I think there was some food writer who said it was obvious that our system had done no good ever, anywhere. Ever, anywhere, Greg. We go back to examining the bouillabaisse, pal. One of those things where you're like, part of the problem is people are only hearing one side of the argument. And if the people who do create the jobs, the people who do create the products and do create the services, the people who's like, hey, no, actually, you didn't see us invest $2 million in a new factory over here, or you didn't see us expand our workforce or give raises to our workers. Obviously, there was an effort right when the tax cuts came out for companies who were announcing these sorts of things. And look, getting good publicity over, of course they want to get good publicity. But anyway, if you put more of that argument out there, people are less likely to say, all those fat cats on Wall Street, they're the ones who get all the money. And it would be good for everybody. So I salute FedEx. I salute Mr. Smith. By the way, I believe he was briefly discussed as a running mate for John McCain back in 2008. So this was a guy who's been but it was all from military logistics. He got the idea for FedEx. And, now it's a worldwide company, one of the biggest in the world.
Fantastic. Jim, you were out, a week or two ago, and Chad Benson and I were talking about Bill Gates being a little squeamish about whether Elizabeth Warren might want $100 billion of his money ultimately through the wealth tax. And one of the things we didn't mention at the time was the Twitter response from the left to Bill Gates was essentially, what, $100 billion? You think that's too much? So there's literally no amount of money that the left doesn't want to take from people that it considers, quote unquote, the rich. And I think it was the Wall Street Journal and maybe some private groups that estimated that the Elizabeth Warren plan would be taxing some rich people 146%, which, of course, gives them tremendous incentive to keep doing what they're doing.
Almost none of this comes from concern over the deficit and the debt. If it was, we could at least give them a little bit of credit for that. A lot of this is, hey, you're rich and I hate you. Right? I think it was Adam Carolla who likes to do this anecdote about how Americans used to see a fancy car driving down the street, and the father would say to his son, if you work hard, someday you'll drive a car like that too. Now, the car drives down the street, and the father says to his son, we hate that guy because he's got a fancy car, and we see no way we can ever live that kind of lifestyle. It is not a good trend in American life, and good for those who are pushing against it.
All right, let's talk about our bad martini now, Jim. And there's, I think, a reason that the royal family in the UK doesn't do a lot of interviews. And we're finding out again why that's probably the case. Prince Andrew, of course, has been linked to Jeffrey Epstein. We knew it before the Amy Robach tape, but she specifically talked about how the palace had intervened, threatened them with not being able to interview Will and Kate, because obviously that's way more important than clamping down on one of the most prolific pedophiles in the history. But Prince Andrew's looking to clear his name. Just the fact that he decided to do this interview with the BBC, his publicist quit, which tells you how confident he was that his boss was going to do a good job here. Prince Andrew, a bizarre interview. The one we don't have the clip of is when he was accused of getting a little too up close and personal with a woman at a dance club and sweating all over. And he said, that's not possible because I don't sweat. I was a fighter pilot in the Falkland Islands War, and because of the harrowing experience, I sweat then. I don't sweat now because nothing ever compares to that experience. Then when it came to Jeffrey Epstein...
Greg, isn't it he said he didn't sweat for a while, but now he sweats again. He has somehow magically regained the ability to sweat that he did not have when he was meeting with these, allegedly meeting with these underage women.
Yes. Very, very convincing testimony here from Prince Andrew. But so he does this interview with the BBC, and he swears up and down that he never met the underage accuser, this Virginia Roberts that Amy Robach had interviewed. Here's the exchange.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
But you were staying at the house of a convicted sex offender.
It was a convenient place to stay. I've gone through this in my mind so many times. At the end of the day, with the benefit of all the hindsight that one could have, it was definitely the wrong thing to do.
Did you spend a lot of time with that hindsight? Was that a tough call there? But here's how he followed up that answer with why he ultimately stayed at Epstein's place.
But at the time, I felt it was the honourable and right thing to do. And I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable.
I hung out with the convicted sex offender because I'm too honourable. Jim, the gall on this guy.
Brass ones, Greg. First of all, on the whole, I didn't sweat then, and since then I've regained the human ability to sweat. But for a while, I did not have the capacity to sweat. Doesn't that picture you're watching a bad sitcom, and the nerdy protagonist has been caught peeking in the girl's room or something? Something like that he wasn't supposed to do, and the character has to lie, and he's trying to come up with this is the sort of thing they would come up on those kind of cheesy stories. Oh, I don't sweat. I'm incapable of sweating. I lost the ability to sweat in war, but you're sweating now. But I gained it back somewhere between then and now, But then the whole, this reflects that I'm too honorable is a really unique defense to deploy when you are accused of engaging in sleeping with underage prostitutes. This is really bad. Now, what's really kind of interesting is people noted that over in the UK, whatever controversies have embroiled the royal family, usually they've been of, dare I say, a more routine adultery affairs sort of matter. And then they go and you kind of do what we used to be the tearful Barbara Walters interview, right? You go on there and say, Barbara, I've made mistakes and I regret so much what I've done to my family and how I've put or Bill Clinton with 60 Minutes interview with Hillary Clinton, we've seen the tearful confession. And in a lot of cases, that can do a person a lot of good. It occasionally backfires. Gary Condit comes to mind, but this one has to be one of the most spectacular ones because his idea is that, again, like everyone else, he had no idea that there was this reputation that somehow everybody around Jeffrey Epstein knew that he was engaged in an underage prostitution ring, except the people who are hanging out with him. Now, the only way this could have gone worse, Greg, is if he just blurted out at one point, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. At least then he probably would have said something was true. No, I'm just kidding. We don't know it yet. This was bad. This was a really bad interview. And it's one of those things where I jokingly said, we've already rebelled against the British Crown, but can we do it again just to emphasize the point? Because the monarchy has only the most ceremonial role in the UK government anymore. Every once in a while, there'll be a poll, and there'll be a significant percentage of folks over in the UK who want to get rid of the monarchy, who don't see it as having much of a point. And as long as you're going out and doing raising money for good causes or calling attention to, Princess Di doing her stuff on landmines, by and large, the British public is going to be fine with it. But if you're engaging in stuff like this, they're going to want to get rid of the monarchy pretty darn fast. But it's okay because, Fergie, the Duchess of York, was over in Saudi Arabia talking about how warm and welcoming everyone was. It wasn't a place where she felt judged. Chop Chop Square in Saudi Arabia was where she did not feel judged.
Yeah, for those of you who don't follow the family tree with the royals, that's the ex-wife of Prince Andrew.
It doesn't fork.
It doesn't fork a lot. And she's the ex-wife of Andrew, yet they still live together or something like that. Well, when he's not hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein anyway. But two thoughts immediately came to my mind after this, Jim. One was the Queen summoning 007 for another job.
I expect your ultimate discretion, 007.
And the other is, you and I, of course, are happily satisfied with where we are employed. But, the great job interview question is, what would you say is your biggest weakness? I think I'm too honorable has got to be right up there, right?
I'm so honorable that I hang around those who are running underage prostitution rings. And, I'm just too forgiving. I'm too easygoing about such things. The sheer number of my friends who are sex offenders is probably my biggest flaw. Next. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming in.
Okay, on to our crazy martini now, and on to the Democratic race for the presidential nomination in 2020. And Jim, as I think we've at least referenced in the past few days, Pete Buttigieg is doing quite well in Iowa now. There's a recent poll that had him up 9 at 25%, and the next closest at 16%. Not doing so great in the other early states, particularly South Carolina. And one of the reasons there is because he's having a very tough time finding any traction with black voters, which make up a big part of the Democratic electorate, particularly in the South. And he's got problems on that front. There's racial issues going on with the police force and elsewhere in the city of South Bend. That kind of blew up in his face a few months ago. And so as a result, Buttigieg rightly has discovered that if he's going to win this nomination, he's got to make some inroads in the black community. So he's put together this thing called the Douglas Plan, which is his effort to bring about racial equality. And it's largely affirmative action in a number of ways. It mandates a certain number of contracts have to go to minorities. There's healthcare provisions, all sorts of other things. And so he released the Frederick Douglass Plan. And according to The Intercept, he put out a list of 400 black South Carolinians that endorse him or his plan. And so the bottom line here is 42% of the people on this list of 400 are actually white. Most of them, or at least many of them, did not actually publicly endorse him, but the campaign gave them the option to opt out of the endorsement if they got back to them soon enough. And then they ended up using stock photos from Kenya to explain how they were going to implement this plan and bring about greater racial equality. So, Jim, there's no shortage of candidates for the Democratic nomination who have been stepping on rakes all over this campaign season and proving themselves absolutely not ready for prime time. Now it looks like it's Mayor Pete's turn.
Yeah, it's really kind of surprising and odd. I don't think they teach that at McKinsey. And let's also point out that, anybody who can read a poll, anybody who can look at it and say, okay, so we've got a candidate who is doing pretty darn well amongst big Democratic donors. Obviously, being the first gay presidential candidate is really getting people excited. There are a couple of people who talk about the beer track candidates and the wine track candidates. And a couple of people even argued that Buttigieg was kind of the, artisan microbrew candidate. But fine. So there's certain demographics he needs to do better amongst. You can't become the Democratic nominee unless you've got at least a certain level of support amongst African Americans. Well, so this matters. This is important. If you really want to win, you got to bring your A game for this. You really don't want to rush and half-ass your way through every outreach effort to African Americans in a Democratic primary. And you know what that starts with? Just checking your Photoshop, just checking your stock photo supply of who you're taking pictures of. I mean, the other thing is also wouldn't you love to start with as many African American supporters as you've got? Now, if you're Pete Buttigieg, maybe you don't have it, but you're telling me nobody back in South Bend can talk about what a great mayor he was? Not a single one? You can't find any African-American lawmakers across the country who have endorsed him? Really? None of his old buddies from the military? There's got to be some Oxford African-American classmates. There's got to be some Harvard African-American. There's got to be somebody African-American who knew this guy and liked him and could talk about what a great guy he is. And start there, right? And for all those folks who would endorse, again, don't say, look, because I've heard from some people who have these sorts of reporters who do this outreach for a quote. Hey, my deadline is in an hour. If you don't get back to me, I'm just going to say you did not respond to a comment. Well, maybe that, I think you got to give people at least a day, right? People have lives. People have busy, unless you're dealing with a press secretary or somebody whose job is to answer questions from reporters all day. By and large, people get busy. They got stuff going on. They may or may not be able to check their messages. They may prefer email instead of phone or whatever. So if you want people to endorse you in a particular way or endorse a particular plan, take the time to check. What if you waited another half a week to a week? Were you going to lose all the progress of this? This is being extremely short-sighted. This is not seeing the forest for the trees. Is this going to cost Buttigieg that much? I don't know. if and when he really becomes a threat to anybody, and somebody pointed out that, outside of, he's doing great in Iowa, he's still not quite there in all those subsequent states. The moment Pete Buttigieg actually is a threat to somebody, then this will turn into a big issue. And then you'll see other candidates starting to bring this up, and it'll begin to look like, look, it's not just, this is not a candidate who doesn't appeal to African-American Democrats. This is a candidate surrounded by people on his campaign who have no idea how to appeal to African-American Democrats. And it's going to look like a fair criticism after something like this.
Jim, how big is the bullseye going to be on Mayor Pete on Wednesday? That's our next Democratic presidential debate.
Are you kidding me? It's that soon? Wow. Look, with all this excitement, who can forget? And, they have – okay, I do remember this one because Julian Castro has not made the stage. So technically he's M. Night Shyamalan character. He was dead all along. He just didn't know it. And we've got Tulsi did make it, so there's that excitement. But I think probably if he could, with this lead in Iowa, and again, this might help Biden, who's again not turned in some sort of spectacular debate performances the last few times. But there's been enough criticism coming at Warren, enough criticism coming at everybody else that Biden might manage to come through unscathed. Because let's face it, the 30-something mayor of South Bend is not the most natural choice for, people say, this guy's the next president we should definitely have.
He will be on the defensive. He was on the offensive a lot against Elizabeth Warren, so don't be surprised if she throws a couple of sharp elbows in there. And
the valedictorian against the angry professor.
It's a showdown that had to happen at some point, and now it will. Jim, congratulations again on the Jets, and we'll talk again tomorrow.
Thank you. And I just want to quote, we can expect a lot of on Wednesday?
What?
I just want to say in conclusion, Barack.
Very good. Yeah. Well, wait till he and Duvall get up there. That'll be fun, if Duvall ever gets up there. Anyway, he's Jim. I'm Greg. Thank you for being with us today. Have a great day, and join us again Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch. In the meantime, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a great review, and we'll see you tomorrow.